My name is Situmbeko Wambulawae, but you can call me Stu Relatable. I know you're used to seeing me bring the tea, but that's not the tea we're bringing here today. But wait, so the Count Me In podcast is actually going to be talking about all the trending topics, and we're going to be talking about the impact made by women and young women in political, social, and leadership spaces. Before I get into this, first of all, I want to tell you that I am not here alone today. I have a very full house, and I just want you guys to see everybody who's here, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves. Tell me a little bit about you, what you do, and what brings you here today. So I think I'm going to start this side.
Good morning. My name is Asianga Mshiva from Zambia Police under Community Services Directorate, which has a number of units under it. We have the Victim Support Unit, we have the Chaplains, we have the Child Protection, and the Community Safety Unit, I mean.
Hi, Stu.
Hello.
Great to be here. Looking forward to a great conversation.
I am so excited to have you here.
So I'm Pastor Benjamin Mwape. I have a dual role. I have been working as a youth development expert, working with young people in civil society and with international organizations, but particularly within the United Nations. Like I said, my dual role as a pastor as well, I found myself dealing with a lot of these issues within the church as well. So I'm excited to bring a combination of both those experiences to the conversation.
And this one here, who are you?
Hi, Stu.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Mwangala Monde. I am an activist and a feminist and also a gender equality consultant. But I think I'm also going to call myself an expert like Pastor B over here.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I have been working in women's rights specifically for the last 7 years. I think I first started volunteering in 2017. I founded my own organization that I was leading for 5 years, and now I have taken a step back to go into independent consulting, and my consulting has also taken me to the UN, so hi, colleague.
Oh.
Yeah, but right now I am working primarily on ending child marriage and stopping teenage pregnancy.
So we've got a police officer, we've got a pastor, and we've got an activist. I just like the diversity that is here in the group. So as you can see, I'm not in the studio because I wanted to come and introduce you to somebody who is very, very special and instrumental to ensuring that the Count Me In podcast is a reality. This is the European Union Ambassador to Zambia and COMESA, none other than Carolina Stasiak. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for making this podcast a reality.
Hello, Stu. It's a pleasure to host you here at the EU delegation and in my office here.
I'm so excited to be here. I never thought I'd actually enter the EU offices and to meet somebody, an ambassador, and especially a woman. It's like happiness upon happiness. So
happy to have you as well.
Thank you so much. So the first thing I want us to discuss is I want you to just explain what the Count Me In campaign is.
Yes, so the Count Me In campaign, we launched it in March on the International Women's Day, and it's a campaign which is initiated by the European Union, and the idea is to focus on women and youth and to ensure that their voices can be heard, that they can be empowered. So this is the main objective of this campaign, and the podcast that you will be hosting are actually part of this campaign. So we're very happy to be able to provide the platform through the podcasts for the voices of women and youth to be heard.
Great. So one thing that I know, because I did my research, is that you are actually the European Union's first female ambassador to Zambia and also the youngest so far. So why is the Count Me In campaign so important to you?
Yes, so as a woman in a leadership position, and not so old woman, I understand really firsthand what the challenges are that young people and women in particular face to thrive in their jobs, to access leadership positions. And I feel as a woman ambassador, it's also my responsibility to bring the diverse voices, to the table, to the discussion, to the forefront. So I've been engaging quite a lot with youth and in particular with women to ensure that their voices are being heard and accounted for.
Just like talking to you now, I feel like you're passing me this invisible baton to go back into the studio and actually get into these conversations on a much deeper level. Before I go, I just want to say thank you so much for making this podcast a reality. And we hope that we're going to do you justice. And we're definitely going to dive into these conversations a little bit further as the podcasts continue.
Great. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. So from the Ambassador's office, it's time to take it back to the studio so we can dive in, break these conversations in, and get that conversation started. So back to the studio. Before we get into the discussion, I think we should all take a look at the documentary that has been made so you guys can also be aware of what we're going to be discussing, and we can pick up some points from there and you can join us on the flip side. So see you soon. Don't go. 29 years ago, 189 member states of the United Nations came together in Beijing for the 4th World Conference on Women, which has become the blueprint for women's equality interventions around the world. Zambia was represented and since then has continued to work at removing the obstacles to women's active participation in society so they can have a full and equal share in economic, social, cultural, and political decision-making. Despite these efforts and increased female participation in society, the prevalence of sexual gender-based violence in the last decade continues to see an upward trend and is a cause of major concern. The Anti-GBV Act No. 1 of 2011 was the first piece of legislation that defined GBV in Zambia. SGBV can be used to undermine women and girls' decision-making power and autonomy. And over the years, many women have used their voices and platforms to help mitigate some of these problems. One prominent figure in gender-based violence prevention is Honorable Princess Kasune Zulu, Zambia's first female Minister of Justice and Kembe Member of Parliament since 2016. She initially gained global recognition as an HIV/AIDS advocate after discovering her positive status in the 1990s. As a politician, her advocacy extends to raising awareness on critical issues such as poverty, girls' education, child exploitation, human rights, and gender equality. Her work highlights the importance of addressing these interconnected issues to prevent gender-based violence and promote equality.
I came to Parliament with many missions, but one of the missions is that I was not ashamed to say I found out I was HIV positive in 1997. And so coming to Parliament, I knew that I would use my voice and my position to speak about gender-based violence, especially sexually based violence, because without us talking about these issues, we see more numbers, especially among girls, who continue to suffer from sexual abuse.
Zambia took a big step forward with the Gender Equity and Equality Act No. 22 of 2015, which incorporated international human rights standards on gender. But the harsh reality is that many girls in Zambia still face sexual abuse before turning 18, with forced sex being the most common form. This issue is especially severe in rural areas where early child marriages are rampant. Traditional leaders like Chieftainess Chiawa and Chieftainess Kawaza are stepping up to fight against sexual and gender-based violence. They are not just advocating for change, they are educating their communities about the dangers of HIV and AIDS and sexual and reproductive rights. Their initiatives include village one-stop centers to tackle child marriages and provide support for those affected by gender-based violence. Despite increased access to information and technology, many cases of sexual and gender-based violence go unreported. Harassment and abuse often silence women and girls, leading them to withdraw from civic, political, educational, and social spaces.
It is important, therefore, especially for the younger generation, the Gen Zs, the millennials, to understand that we have a responsibility to not only talk about issues of sexual reproductive health to prevent teenage pregnancies, to prevent child marriages, and indeed to fight against any form of violence. And so with my position, I believe that I have a wider reach within Zambia, but indeed outside Zambia, to ensure that our young people do not lose focus on fighting gender-based violence, especially one that is sexually based. I think some of the challenges that Zambia faces around SGBV or sexual gender-based violence is the fact that we come from a very high patriarchal society. And I think sometimes a woman was looked as a second-class citizen, and once that is inculcated in the young minds, it becomes difficult to do away with. And that is why, not only for me at my personal level, as a mother, as a grandmother, as a wife, of course, I want you to abstain. But is that the reality? The answer is no. So in that vein, to avoid abuse of our young people in terms of even unwanted pregnancies leading to illegal abortions, we have to make sure that as parents we summon the courage and tell them about our own experiences, our own young experiences, so that they can understand that we understand where they are. We really need to continue talking about these issues. We need to accept that sexual violence does exist, and it exists within marriages, it exists outside marriages. And so I think you have a responsibility as young people to first and foremost say no to any form of violence, whether it be sexual-based violence, whether it's gender-based violence. Any form of violence should be frowned upon. And we ask that we use our social platforms very responsibly, and to know that where one's rights end, another person's rights begin.
The fight against gender-based violence requires promoting behavioral change. Women and girls' safety is a human right, and it should be everyone's concern to see to it that they exist in a society in which they can thrive. From the documentary, the world has evolved, right? But we still find women unable to speak about their experiences. Why do you think women are unable to actually voice out what they're going through? I think I'll start with the police officer.
Thank you. I think it's because GBV affects men and boys, but mainly women have come out in the open to report. But men and boys feel like, no, this is not for us.
How many people do you see walking into your department to actually report certain things that are happening to them?
I think more than 10 per day.
And from the church perspective, do you also get reports, Coach, that no, this is happening, especially you who works with youths? And I'm sure you work with a lot of Gen Zs.
We're still dealing with what I would call the root causes or the underlying factors that really undermine progress to deal with SGBV. And these have to do with social norms, cultural norms, and I think they're still deep-seated within our communities. It's a situation where you find that somebody is a victim, but they are then told, do not report, because then there's all these other aspects that will be exposed. You know, when you report, sometimes families, for example, say, no, do not report, because then the entire family will be embarrassed. So there's this whole aspect of stigma and shame that sort of keeps people still locked up in that space of not reporting. But I want to believe that also we still have progress to make in terms of awareness. And sensitizing people that they can report these cases and be able to know exactly where to report them. Because I think that the challenge also is that sometimes the people that are advising the victims are not experts.
But one thing I want to find out is, how is it like as a pastor working in this generation, especially where there's so much technology and information, and when something happens in the church, how do you handle it amongst yourselves?
Right, that's a very important question, Stu. And I think there's a lot of delicateness to it in terms of how we handle it, especially that you mentioned we're in a digital space, we're in an information space. Before the person even gets help, they are already all over the the digital space, and people have got all kinds of opinions around it. But I think that this is where now the counseling aspect and the support towards the victim becomes very important. And it's not a one-off process. I mean, it's not a one-off step. It's a process where the intervention really needs to be a process that helps the person not just deal with the trauma of the experience, but also deal with the perceptions, that society will bring upon them. And I have found myself in many instances having to deal with, all of those dynamics in terms of counseling, and sometimes even referring some of these cases beyond the church to try and see how we can help the person or the survivor, not the victim rather, but the survivor, in a very holistic way. And I think that from where I'm sitting, GBV, fighting SGBV requires concerted effort. So on one hand, you will have the church doing their part. On another hand, you will have probably civil society doing their part. But again, in our interventions, we need to be able to go back to the community, because even after you counsel these people in the church, they live in a community. So if the community is not sensitized, then it undermines, the support that has been given to them. So I think that our approach must be very holistic, that on one hand, there are different players that are supporting, but also the community is sensitized, so that then they also don't add, their own injury, salt to the injury when the victim goes back.
But wait, I'm coming back for you.
Let's go.
So like Mwangala, you are an activist, and I think we met many years ago when you were really young, and I was so bright-eyed. I had remember the future is female.
I know.
Remember the first match we did?
We were so radical,
we had almost
so
hopeful there. We had our little placards, and
we were going to change the world.
But one thing I like about activists, especially you who is more Gen Z centered, is like we talked about with Pastor B, the digital age is scary. So you find for instance, sexual gender-based violence is not just about forced rape, but it's also that sometimes people do things without consent. For instance, you wake up one day and you are on Facebook, you are trending, or you are topless.
Revenge porn.
This is one of my worst fears, waking up one day and seeing my butt all over, because you never know what kind of evils are there. So how do you deal with activism in a modern age, and how do you sensitize people?
It is so hard, and my brother is going to kill me for this, but the other day I ended up giving him a lecture because he was trying to exclude me from his WhatsApp status to post something. I think it was a TikTok that was showing some guy saying that when a girl, assuming, or when your partner sends you a view once, and then you go and view it in secret, and then it was like a picture of nails, like a manicure, and then this person looks disappointed. So younger brother, my younger brother was trying to put that on his status, and then he was trying to exclude me from seeing that because he knows I don't play like that. And then by some, I don't know, technical
women in tech.
It wasn't even me. I think it was the gods. And then he accidentally sent that video to me.
Wow.
So I look at it, I'm like, was this meant for me? And he immediately panics and he's like, no, I'm so sorry. I'm not like that and what. I'm just like, these things, right? Like, you're not supposed to put somebody that you're seeing in a situation where they have to send you those pictures, because first of all, revenge porn is a thing today. And away from that, we now have deepfakes, AI porn, right? Where somebody can take somebody's likeness and use all those kinds of things. So activism has evolved, right? And I feel like Zambia is very, very far behind from catching on. I remember we were doing internet safety training a few years back with another organization that I was with, and we traveled all over the country and we tried to speak to them how to be safe, don't do these things. And we were getting so many stories. We were getting stories about young people that have killed themselves because their pictures, their naked pictures were shared out there, and because culturally, we're not supposed to be talking about these things. I'm surprised. Pastor B sounds like it's very progressive. What's your church? Sorry.
Sorry. But wait, before you go in, the other thing, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to ask Pastor B before I get to you. Pastor B, another question I should have asked is, how does the church talk about sexual gender-based violence when the teachings of the Bible and sexuality are something that scares people, especially young people? They don't want to actually admit that they're having sexual intercourse. So if I'm having sexual intercourse as a person, and then something happens to me,
If I'm fornicating,
I am scared
Great,
to
let's
go
go
to
there.
the church because I do not want the pastor to know that I was having sex, and then it will be a whole issue. So how do you bring about conversations of sex to people who you tell they should not be doing it? We should not be doing this.
Right. Yeah, so you're very right. It's something that has been seen. So one of the challenges we've had is that we've perceived the church as the place for perfect people.
Yeah.
The church is actually a clinic. Is a church where people must come and feel that they'll be supported as they are. Regardless of how they feel about, what they're going through and what is going on around them. We need to intentionally create that environment for people to be able to come and say, look, I am going through this, without feeling, if I now go and report about
They
this,
will
then I'm
judge
going
me.
to be cascaded or judged about something else. They must be able to still feel they need to come and be helped. And talking about that, for example, I think one of the other things is just how the whole conversation around sexuality, SGBV. By the way, SGBV is there in the Bible. Yes, you have rape cases in the Bible.
Yeah, we do.
And
I
God
remember
punished
that
those
one.
rape cases, So the Bible already set standards, for justice for perpetrators of SGBV. Right within Scripture, you find cases of, justice that is, given to perpetrators of SGBV. So we must be able to look at it from a holistic point of view, and I think be able to approach it with grace as well, and not necessarily condemnation.
Yeah. So actually, when I was young, I think I was 21, 22, I was actually a victim of sexual gender-based violence. So I went out, and then this is the first time, I've talked about it even in my TEDx talk, but this is like, you reach a stage where, because we have these platforms and conversations, you can talk about it. So I was a victim of sexual gender-based violence. And one of the things that I was worried the most about was, first of all, was calling my mom. I'm like, Mommy, I was so scared to call my mother because I was scared she'd be like, what were you doing outside? What were you, So it was so difficult for me. But it reached a stage where I was like, first of all, I was sort of held hostage where I was. It's a long story. I will come to the police with it too. But after it happened, it was so difficult for me to actually get help, because one of the things that happened is, unfortunately, the police officer who came to the scene was not on my side. And one of the things that I was asked was, it was a male police officer, what were you wearing? Who were you with? Oh, you were with strangers. What were you doing out of your hostel at that time? Who are your parents, So all those things made it so difficult for me to actually come out and even say, this thing has happened to me. So how do you advise young people who have something happen to them, especially in this age, for the police? How do you advise young people? Do you still do those tactics or those questions where you make someone feel like what happened to them was their fault, or do you have different ways of counseling them? So maybe just walk me through that, because as a young 21-year-old, I would maybe want to hear that from a police officer, so I know that it's okay for me to go to the police station.
Thank you very much. I think nowadays we have trained police officers who have undergone a victim support unit, I think, training under CSD, where you would find that even when a person walks in to the police with a problem, who will be treated nicely, will be taken into a separate room where will be asked not by many police officers, but just one police officer. Mind you, we even have men under victim support unit, but those are trained on how to receive a victim. So the victim will not be interviewed by many, but by just one person.
Yeah. So there's a lot more grace now.
I wanted to actually give a very typical example there, Stu. Not so long ago, as I was dealing with a teenage pregnancy in my counseling session, and this girl came, she's obviously fallen pregnant, and just like you're saying, the reason why she didn't come much earlier was, first of all, she was thinking, if I go to the pastor and tell the pastor that I'm pregnant, the issue is not how do they help me get out of the pregnancies, how did you find yourself there? So she delayed to come. But when she came and we began to have this conversation, and unfortunately in her case, I think the family didn't handle her situation very well. So she was really in a traumatic state and everything was just falling apart. So at some point, she breaks down. Then she pauses and says, I'm surprised that you haven't penalized me for what I have done, and you've just focused on helping me recover. I was ready, when I came to you, I was ready to come and be dealt with. And I'm like, look, the world has already condemned you. Your family has already condemned you. Your peers, your society has already condemned you. I can't afford to add to that. So I think that approach is what we need to learn to sort of apply, especially when we're dealing with young people.
The other thing I want to touch on is there are some times when SGBV happens to people, and sometimes people don't even know that they've experienced SGBV. Huh? Like, for instance, what were you talking about earlier? Revenge porn. Instead of you worrying about, oh, this has happened to me, like, oh, something nasty about me has been put out there. Or there are also things like, what do you call that thing when... I've forgotten the technical term, but for instance, you're having consensual sex and then the person removes the condom.
Stealthing, when you get stealth.
Yeah. So you find like there are certain issues like that and people don't even know that something has happened to them. So how do you go around, especially you who is focused on child marriages and early pregnancies, how do you go around having those conversations, especially with young people?
I mean, I feel like young people today are very receptive of this information. And I think there's a lot of organizations that have laid the groundwork, especially in rural areas. You can go. I was in Petauke a couple of months ago. I went to have like focus group discussions with, students aged between like 9 to 19 pupils. And I was like, trying to skate around topics, and then they were coming out and saying, oh yeah, when I got pregnant, I went and had an abortion. I'm like, oh. Okay. So I shouldn't have to hold my mouth for anything. So like, there's a lot of organizations that are laying the groundwork. But the one thing that I have found is that there's no continuity because funding, obviously. So you find that maybe they will start speaking, like with young people in one area. They will speak to them, give them something to work with, and then they'll go and they'll never come back. And this is something that you always get when you're out in the field. They'll just be like, when are you coming back? Because you people always come and you say these things and you say we're going to do this, and then you never come back. So I feel like the young people are receptive. The parents are also willing to listen. It's not, these conversations are not the taboos that they were. But I feel like maybe resources is where we're lacking. Because when we talk about the government, this information should be readily available in school. But just a couple of years ago, we were in fights between the church, sorry to spotlight you, the church, the activists, the church were opposing comprehensive sexuality education, and now they have changed it into something. It is such a terrible, it's called Elshi now. It's like...
Elshi.
I know. It's very confusing. It's supposed to be life skills and something. Yes. So like they shorten it as Elshi. And it's just like when you name something comprehensive sexuality education, you know what you're getting when you go in there.
Yeah.
But then when you rebrand it into something like life skills, already you are showing the people they're supposed to be speaking to that we're not supposed to be addressing the big S word, that kind of thing. So I feel like we need to be open, and that openness needs to come from up there, because there's only so much we can do for us that are,
Talking about openness, I remember when I was in grade 11, term 3, our teacher was teaching us biology, and it was final.
Sorry, can I just cut you short?
Sure.
I didn't learn reproduction
No.
because I swear, like we were so excited for it. And then our teacher was very awkward. So like we're waiting because we had
Girl,
the
that
text.
is the story I'm about to give. That is the story.
We had our textbooks and so we're counting like,
Yeah.
okay, now it's time for reproduction. And then he skips and goes to another topic. And we're like, sir, you haven't taught. And it's just like, just read. And that's how he moved on. Like,
You've just got my story.
I'm sorry.
That's what I'm saying. Grade 11, term 3. It was when we're supposed to learn about reproduction. And then our teacher walks into the class and then she goes, welcome. And then we're like, whoa. Then she goes, today we're going to talk about, then she just points at the board, this. And it was just the word reproduction. We had already read Kangatenze, it was chapter 20, reproduction. So we were just waiting for the teacher to actually just give us an actual refresher so we can point out what we should focus on. But when it was time for her to do it in school, she skipped through everything. We never heard the word sex or sexual in class.
exactly. And that is a very good point because again, this is what's going on right now. Young people have access to information. Like everything is at the tip of
Their fingertips,
yes,
literally. Yeah.
yes. But then like when we're not speaking to them directly, they don't know what to take away and, what to throw out because it's available. And like today, when you think about the anti-choice movement, even this red pill content, the incels and everybody, there's information coming from everywhere. Yeah. And then like, they don't know what to sieve, what to keep, like what's good for me. So they'll keep that information. The young boys are now looking to Andrew Tate, thinking, that is the person to look up to. That is like, yes, that is the epitome of manhood, but like, if you are speaking to them, you have young people in your lives, you are working with the youth, you speak to them and you speak to them about positive masculinities and like what it takes to be a man, because like in our culture, it is something different. And now you go on the internet and it's, something different. And then even the women, you look at how like they have regressed. I feel like when we started out as activists,
back in the day,
we were quite radical.
Yeah.
And we were there like fighting everybody. We were the bitter, angry feminists.
Yeah.
And I feel like we don't have those anymore. Like content, we're tired. But like content creators are out there putting out the femininity content, the stay-at-home girlfriend, stay-at-home wife, and whatever, trad wife, and all of that, and
TikTok.
And that's really nice. But then for the young person who doesn't understand like the nuances around that lifestyle, you don't understand that you have to have your own money, or like that's not an ideal situation because when you're in a place where like your partner is providing everything for you, what's going to stop them from financially abusing you, from emotionally abusing you and things like that? But then when they go on TikTok, it's all they see. Come spend the day with me as a stay-at-home wife. I've gone shopping. I've gone to, this kinds of thing. And the young person will be like, that's what I want, and there's no shortage of men with money out there. But like, where's your freedom? Where's your agency? And does the young person know that kind of thing? So I feel like there's already a gap there.
So are you both on social media, especially TikTok and Instagram?
I am.
You are.
Pretty
of
much on
course,
everything.
if you're a youth pastor, you really need
I have to keep up.
Yeah, you need to keep up because once they start doing the trends and you don't know,
you'll be
they'll
lost.
be there talking about, especially TikTok, they have all these like sounds and trends.
Yeah.
And then you're there, they're like, what's going on? You can send. You're just there. Send what? I want us all to just take a look at the screen so we can check out the Vox Pop and listen to conversations from people on the streets and what they had to say, and then we're going to pick it up from there. Is that okay?
Yeah. That's good.
So everybody check out this Vox Pop and then we'll continue this discussion after this.
Half of the society is normally made up of women. And I personally feel that their voices in the state's well-being must be regarded because women have this unique strengths and they just come with them diversity and just being part of the decision-making process.
I believe that every woman and every girl deserves to live in a just society where we are not afraid of the unknown, but we feel protected, respected, and appreciated. I believe that every woman deserves to know their rights and speak out for themselves. I believe that in a society that is constantly improving and evolving by the day, every woman deserves to have a seat at the decision-making table, having their voice heard, having their concerns taken down. For it is women who people say are the pillars of society, because they say behind every successful person was a woman, being the mother.
Do you think that social and cultural norms play a role in sexual gender-based violence? I'm going to say sexual gender-based violence because there's a big difference between SGBV, sexual gender-based violence, and gender-based violence as a whole. So do you think these norms play quite a role in this?
Yeah, I think that they do.
Yeah.
I think that they do, because if you consider, like, maybe in a marriage, right? Because I don't think that marital rape is recognized in Zambia yet, is it? No, it's not. So if you think about the Lobola traditions and the teachings that you go through, where like your husband is entitled to sex all the time, you know, I don't think the issue of consent comes up.
Yeah.
You know, there's conversations where it's like, okay, even if you're sick, but are your parts sick? Like, you know, let the man
I've heard that
have,
before.
you know, what he needs
Yeah.
and things like that. So like when you're going into your marriage, you're already like stripped of all your agency as a woman. You're just told, you know, you're there to save, and, you know, and the man also is taught to take, you know, he's paid. It's his. Even outside of marriage, when you think about young people, I know it's not common these days, but like we don't really address like the age gap relationships the way that they should be addressed. You know, if a young person is in an inappropriate relationship with an older person, already there's like power dynamics there, right? Like the young person has no power, has no like power to negotiate their place in that relationship. And then because of our norms, I guess, and how we look at young girls, we're going to say she's too fast. You know, she doesn't listen. She likes older men and things like that. But instead of framing the conversation in a way that we say that that man is, you know, targeting a young innocent person that doesn't have any power, or say in that relationship, basically.
One thing, especially in my activism, that I learned, first of all, I had to unlearn certain things, but then I needed to also now, English, I had to now relearn certain things, because one of the things also that I've discovered also as activists sometimes is that we're so quick when we're having conversations on culture to say all cultural customs are wrong. We're taught to believe that everything is wrong. I personally now, well, I'm saying it for myself, I feel like it is not the cultural systems that are wrong per se, but it's the way the narrative has been twisted to benefit a few. How the patriarchal system came into place and things that were for the benefit of our culture have been twisted, because I know there are certain things about my culture that, especially me who's Lozi, there are certain things that actually benefit me, but then because of the way that they have been twisted to give a minority few the advantage, we end up saying that all aspects of culture are wrong. What should be done is for us to sit down, go to the drawing board, and actually have open conversations about certain topics and talk about them not in a way that shields people, but gives them the opportunity to make informed decisions that they can then apply into their own lifestyles. So I feel like even as a young person, I'm calling myself a young person, but I'm now an internet auntie, you know? As a young person, I personally believe that as people, we are the custodians of our culture, we're the custodians of our language, and it's up to us to ensure that what's going forward, especially what we're passing on to younger generations, is something that, one, they understand, and two, when given the opportunity, they learn about it, then make an informed decision.
Yeah, but how do you ensure that, or rather, how do you get that information? Because the current custodians, they're withholding that information. I know there's been like a project that's been pending. I don't know if you know UNFPA. They have been trying to update the initiation curriculum, basically. You know, and they have been meeting with the Banachimbusas and the initiators for years and years, but they still won't give that information, you know, like they admit it's not written down, but they call them and say, come and tell us these things, and they refuse, and they say it's cultural, we can't be speaking about these things to, like, you know, people that have Western agendas and things like that. So even if like there's aspects that are good, we don't know them, because the aspects that are being passed on are things that are disadvantaging women, you know, and leaving us in a more vulnerable state. So how do we like say some of them are good or redeemable if we don't know what they are?
I think the key also there is to just really understand that open dialogue is the key.
Exactly.
But also that open dialogue is a process. So we need to continue to engage. I totally understand, I think, the aspect of Alangizi and Achimbusa and all of that. The idea is that everybody is holding on to what they feel is right.
Yeah.
And when you come in and sort of castigate what they're doing, you've already started on a wrong foot with them. So I think the idea with open dialogue is to first of all help everybody understand that we are trying to solve a much bigger issue here than it relates to one cluster of group, but see the bigger picture, see the impact. If we don't address SGBV, what are the repercussions on the nation, on our society as a whole? And so every now stakeholder needs to say, what can I do to contribute to the success of this? And this will be a give and take process, essentially. But I also wanted to just weigh in on something that was said earlier. For me, the whole conversation around SGBV, and if we're going to make progress around it, I think the greater investment needs to be in the agency of the individuals, you know, empowering the individuals, aspects of self-awareness. We were talking earlier on around the pressure with social media, with the digital space, and how people begin to romanticize, you know, certain idealisms of how life should be, and they end up in toxic relationships because they feel this is what is giving me what is acceptable to society. So they would rather stay in this abusive relationship, toxic relationship, but then still get the identity. So they're trading their identity for this.
You know what's funny? Like when we talk about this same trad wife content, they're selling it as, you know, you can stay at home, have a working husband, provide everything and what. But how much is Nara Smith making from TikTok?
She's making a lot of
She's making millions.
It's a business.
You know,
at the end
that's
of the day.
anything but being a traditional wife.
Yeah.
You know, but like if people don't have context, if young people don't have context, they'll think, oh, I will have to get married and then sit and I'll make a TikTok video here and there and, you know.
And so context is key. And I think added to that for me is learning to draw boundaries, especially for young people. And within the aspect of learning to draw boundaries, is also helping them understand, because sometimes we talk about these toxic relationships, abusive relationships. Some of them don't actually know.
They don't know. They don't see the signs.
So we need to then also be able to raise awareness of what are the red flags that you must look out for.
What are you looking
because like
that
for
constitute
most,
a
if it's not violent, then they feel like it's not abusive. But then there's other forms of abuse as well. That
emotional,
are not
psychological, and all
financial and all
financial,
of that.
Conversations on sexual gender-based violence need everybody on board. It is not just for one person. That's why it's important to have the police on board. It's important to have our pastors on board. It's important to have our activists on board, and even some of us, your internet aunties, because at the end of the day, we're all affected. It's important that we use our voices to speak out so that we can stand and use our testimonies and encourage people to say, count me in. Thank you so much to our friends at the European Union for making this podcast possible. Until the next episode, I will see you soon. It is a goodbye.